So culture's under pressure. So these are the things that led up to all the stuff that you talked about. You know, the Red River Wars, the Dakota Wars, all that type of stuff. And if you look at comparing ways Native Americans, white settlers viewed and used land, one thing is for Native Americans, we talked a little bit about this last year, the diverse geography creates this diversity of cultures. I mean, if you think about the United States today, Alaska is very different from Arizona, right? So all these different surroundings are going to lead to this diversity of culture. And so the Great Plains never was very good for agriculture in the first place, which is why Native Americans hunted and gathered and followed the buffalo. The other thing is there's a very different cultural value on food and land. Native Americans are subsistence farmers. They grow enough to make it through the year. And if you think about this fact that they're semi-nomadic or nomadic, why would you want 3 years worth of corn to haul with you every time you move? It just doesn't make sense. So for Native Americans, when they think of land, they think of it as it provides what I need for right now. And it will provide enough for the future. I don't need 3 years worth of stuff. And if you think about American culture, we like to accumulate a lot of junk. I mean, just think of the iPads and iPhones. Why do you really need an iPhone 4? I mean, is it that much cooler? Maybe it is, but you don't need to. I mean, it doesn't improve your life, really. It does some cooler things, but that's the difference. For white settlers, they think of surplus, they think of accumulation, they think of getting all this wealth, and Native Americans just don't have those same values. Nomadic versus semi-nomadic. About the only group of Native Americans that I really can think of that are fairly well settled would be the Northwest Coast, and that's just because that place is just teeming with wildlife and food. And they actually build permanent houses that they live in. Most other places, even if you go to the East Coast, the longhouses, every 10 to 15 years they'd have to move because they would have depleted the soil. So then they pick up, they move, they build new longhouses. So even they are semi-nomadic. Every 10 or 15 years they're moving. Native Americans view land and themselves as part of nature, whereas whites view it as a resource for wealth. It's just a completely different mindset. So if we look at pre-Civil War, the policy for Native Americans pushed them to the Great American Desert, which is the Great Plains. What we're going to find with the Homestead Act is it's semi-arid. It's not great for agriculture. It is when they're settling it because you've got about 2 to 3 decades where they have above average rainfall, and it lures people into thinking that the Great Plains are going to be good for agriculture. Not really. So we'll move them to the Great American Desert, the Great Plains. No white person will ever want to live there anyway. You can have it forever. So in 1834, they pass a law. It regulates trade between Native Americans and whites. It's also designed to keep whites out of Indian territory as much as possible. 1850s, the problem is gold and silver gets discovered, and not just in California, but also Oklahoma, eventually the Dakotas, changes the whole game plan. So now whites want to get in there. Plus the Transcontinental Railroad, you have to go through Indian territory if you're going to go across the continent. So 1860s, 1870s, they moved to the reservation system, which means no freedom, suppression, and eventually poverty. So what this will show is the progression of land secessions. Dawes Act right now, and that's what gets left. And that's the present. Ready? So besides those factors, you've got disease. This is smallpox. Those pox, when they're popped in the first 5 to 10 days of having them, are extremely contagious, and it gets passed very quickly. The other thing to keep in mind is that can get inside of your lungs as well, and those can pop, and your lungs can fill up. But Native Americans have no immunity to smallpox.
Ugh.
Next.
Ugh.
And the second big factor is the wholesale slaughter of buffalo. And this was a newspaper article that was talking about it from a variety of different factors. But they have the 300 a day, which was just for pure pleasure, 1,000 for uses, for extinction, and then you also have Native Americans who did it for robes, and they say whiskey as well. And
Really?
daily for fun, which is the railroad, and they're just shooting the buffalo as they go by on the railroad. Okay.
Why? Because there was so plenty.
There's so many they thought they'd never die. So that guy's standing on a mound of bison skulls. That's a hill of bison skulls. And then that's another picture. The picture I was trying to find was the one where you just see hundreds of buffalo skinned and left to rot, and they had just taken the robes and the horns. Yeah. But they didn't care because they figured if they killed the buffalo, they'd kill the Plains Indians too. New settlers, Native Americans clashing, that would be the videos that you guys all did. The conflicts, broken treaties, promises, the encroachment of whites, the differing massacres. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is really kind of a big mess to begin with. Even if you did have talented people who cared greatly about what they were doing, they didn't have the resources to meet their promises. You're supposed to have so much food every month. And when push came to shove, if the government was running out of things, it was the Native Americans who didn't get the food or the supplies. You'd have others who would use their positions in the Bureau of Indian Affairs to skim things off the top and to sell to white settlers. So there's all kinds of problems. Underfunded, understaffed, not great people working there. It's kind of a dead-end job. Okay. So you got these broken promises. This is the Minnesota-Dakota Wars. And you can kind of see this was the land that they were supposed to have. And it gets broken into this very little strip. And then during the Civil War, because the American government is kind of busy fighting other things, that's where you get these attacks. So an advertisement for Indian fighters in August of 1864. If you're someone who wants to kill Native Americans, they're looking for volunteers. Yeah, my video isn't working, but I found a video of the ghost dance, which is the lead up to the Battle of Wounded Knee. Edison recorded, oh, it's gonna work. Awesome. Edison, in one of the first movies made that survived, recorded a Native American ghost dance. And so you see the ghost dancers and then a ghost dance shirt. And it's more of a religious, spiritual movement that takes place. The problem is this message and it's reaching out to all these Native American tribes, and the government fails to understand that this is trying to preserve Native American culture, and they're trying to hold on to it as best they can. This is not meant to be a violent military revolt or anything of the nature, and they just overreact violently to it. They're afraid that all this unification is going to lead them to causing more trouble. Here we thought we had gotten it all taken care of, and then this ghost dance starts picking up steam, and that's where the Battle of Wounded Knee comes from. And that's the aftermath of it. Okay. So after they put them on reservations, then it was a matter of figuring out how are we going to make them successful. The idea is assimilation. We're going to bring them into white culture. So out of these Native American wars, you've got the book A Century of Dishonor, where she writes about all of these injustices. We have to do something. She takes the book, mails it out to all the senators. She sends one to the president. And so Congress is motivated somewhat to try and figure out a way to deal with this Native American problem. They come up with the Dawes Act. The idea is instead of dealing with tribes, we're going to deal with individual families. We're going to give them a plot of land. We're going to teach them how to be farmers. We're going to send their kids to boarding schools where they'll dress like whites, talk like whites, become white. If they become white, they become farmers, they'll become contributing, successful members, everything's going to be great. They really thought this was going to be the Emancipation Proclamation for Native Americans. That's how Congress is talking about it. So the goal is good. The goal is we're going to try and figure out how to make lives for Native Americans better. The problem is the goal is based on the assumption that everything Native Americans do is terrible. You're backwards, you're savage, you don't know what you're doing. You need to be like us so you can be happy and rich. And it's not a good place to start with. So the results are pretty bad. And so these would be things they would put up as pictures, the before, the after. Look how savage backwards they were. Look how modern and great they are now. This is going to be successful. One of the really interesting things that comes out of it, and I don't know if it was intentional or not, it'd be interesting to see, is whatever reservation lands they had before the Dawes Act are diminished greatly afterwards. Because what it does is, once you take those reservations, divide them up into 160-acre plots, and hand them out to families, they realize that there's millions upon millions of acres left over. So we'll give the Native Americans the worst farmland so they can become good farmers, and we'll take the best farmlands from reservations and sell it to the whites. It makes a lot of sense, yeah. So if you look, this is pre-Dawes Act, post-Dawes Act, and it's going to get even smaller after that. But this goes to show Minnesota. This was in 1851. Let's go ahead and get the next one. This is 1877. And the next one shows after the Dawes Act what's left of that reservation. It just gets all peeled away. The interesting thing is, despite all of the attempts to wipe out Indian culture, World War II, Indian code talkers, the first one was the Meskwaki Indians from Iowa. That's a group of Cheyenne. And the last is the list of the Navajos, which would be the code talker movie that you probably most remember. The problem the Japanese ran into is you have these languages that are being spoken by only a handful of people around the world. And around the world is an exaggeration. You've got a handful of people in the United States that can speak this language, and they turn their Native American words into things that represent military. Like, a lot of times they refer tanks as turtles. But no one in the rest of the world knows the Navajo word for turtle, or the Sioux, or the Meskwaki, and so you've got these individuals who are talking these codes all throughout the Pacific, and the Japanese had no clue what was going on. And so despite all of our attempts to eradicate this culture, during World War II, it really saves our behinds.